Sotah, page 14, Daf Yudalid. Today we're going to finish the first chapter of Sotah, and we'll begin the second chapter. So, the end of the first chapter continues in the Agadata and telling us more about various things related first to Mitzrayim, Moshe Rabbeinu, and other things, and a mixture of various things that we're going to mention over here. So, Rabbi Chami, the son of Rabbi Chanina, says that you have to go after Hashem. So the question is, how do you go after Hashem? Hashem, it says, is a fire. A fire consumes. So obviously it means you have to follow his character, the way Hashem behaves. Because obviously physically also can't go after Hashem. So what are the way he behaves? So number one, Hashem clothes those who are naked. Like it says when Adam and Chava were kicked out of Gan Eden and they were naked after they sinned, and all of a sudden they felt their nakedness. Hashem covered them with kasnasar, covered them with clothing. So also we have to clothe people who don't have any clothes. Hashem visited the sick, like it says after Avram had his circumcision. Hashem visited Beileini Mamre. So we also have to visit the sick. Hashem comforted the mourners, that it says after Abraham passed away that Hashem blessed Yitzchak. So we also have to go and to comfort the mourners. Hashem buries the dead, like it says that Hashem buried Moshe Bagai. So also we have to bury the dead. So that's what it means, you have to follow Hashem. Now it says that Hashem clothed Adam and Chava with kasnas oir, which oir, it means skin, leather. So clothing for the skin. So there's a discussion. Rav and Shmuel, common debaters. So one says kasnas oir means the clothing itself was wool that comes from skin, which is wool. The other says that it's clothing that the skin benefits. Our body, our skin benefits, but the clothing itself was made out of linen. Now, from this, Rabbi Simloi says that the Torah, the 5 books, begins with Gemilas Chasadim, with God's kindness, and it ends with Hashem's kindness. The beginning, it shows God's kindness that He clothed Adam and Chava after they were kicked out of Gan Eden, they were kicked out of the paradise. And it ends with Gemilas Chasadim, with Hashem's kindness, because it ends that Hashem buried Moshe Rabbeinu. He was involved in his burial, so that's Hashem's benevolence and kindness. The Reb Simloi again says, why did Moshe Rabbeinu, and we talked about it before, have such a desire to enter into Israel? Did Moshe want to taste its fruit? Like the spies brought back food, did he want to taste the fruit? Did he want to enjoy any other of its physical attractions and good things that it has? No. Moshe Rabbeinu's calculation was like this. There were many mitzvahs that Hashem gives in the Torah could only happen in Israel. So Moshe said, let me enter into Israel so all the mitzvahs could be done through me. I want to be able to do the mitzvahs. Moshe's love of mitzvahs. So Hashem said, that's what you're looking for? To do the mitzvahs? I'm going to give you reward as if you did the mitzvahs. Even though you didn't do them, I'll give you the reward as if you gave the mitzvahs. And it brings down a verse, which the verse says like this, that L'chein achalek leverabim, that it says, Hashem says that I have divided amongst him, amongst the great. I divided to him amongst the great. Who is the great? The great means our greatest of our greatest. Atzumi Michal Shal, with the mightiest, which is Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So Moshe got a part, a reward as if the same caliber and level of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the first Jews, who were great in Torah and mitzvahs. Tachas HaSheher Lamavis Nafshi, because he's beard his soul to death, which means that Moshe was ready to die for the Jewish people, where he told Hashem, erase me from your book if you do not forgive the Jewish people. And he was counted with the dead, because Moshe died along with those in the desert who died, who didn't make it into Israel, who they died for their sin. Moshe not for their sin, but they died for their sin. And he interceded, the Chet Rab Nasa, and he carried the sin of many, meaning that he fought for the Jews for their act of worshiping the golden calf. And then it finishes off, La Pleshimegi interceded for sinners that he interceded on behalf of sinners that they should be able to be accepted to do teshuvah. So Moshe prayed on behalf of these people. So this is a verse written about Moshe that Hashem gave him the greatest accolades, and all the things that Moshe wanted, he was able to get, even though he didn't go into the land of Israel. So this finishes off the first chapter of Sotah. Now we begin the second chapter on this page, and here we talk about the Sotah. We're going back to the Sotah herself. So she has to be brought to Jerusalem if this woman who is caught in private, but we don't know if anything occurred between her and the man that she was with. She has to go to Jerusalem and she has to drink a potion of water mixed with other things, as we had mentioned. Or we will mention more later, the parchment with the part of the Torah that talks about Sotah erased into the water and some dirt in the water, etc. So she has to drink this, and then her husband brings on her behalf a mincha, a meal offering. So now we're going to talk about what happens with the meal offering. So it says she would bring the meal offering in a wicker basket, and the kohen would put the husband would put the basket with the meal offering in her hand to make it hard for her. And now he tells us a few things. All meal offerings that we brought in the temple, and there were many, it was brought to the temple in a klisharis, in a vessel that was owned by the temple that was holy, and it was, the end of it was also it's a beginning to end, it was in a holy vessel. But this woman's Sotah offering was brought at first in a wicker basket, and only at the end it was put into a holy vessel. All of the meal offerings have to have oil and frankincense. But in her meal offering, there was no oil or frankincense. It was very basic. All of the meal offerings came from wheat, but hers came from barley. Now, there was another meal offering that came from barley. It's connected to Pesach, which we just had. The Minchas Omer, before we start counting the Omer, which is the first offering that was brought for the new crop. So even though that came from barley, but it came from the finest of the barley. But this came from the mixture of all the good and the bad. So it was a very low class offering. And Rabbi Gamliel says basically that just like all of her actions were actions, animalistic actions driven by her drives and instincts, instead of having her mind control her behavior. So therefore, her sacrifice is brought from barley, which is an animalistic food. So now the Gemara says like this. Why did we want to make her tire out? What are we trying to accomplish? So we say that she should admit that if she actually was guilty, she should admit that she was guilty instead of bringing the sacrifice of the meal offering on the altar. So now the Gemara concludes, if the Torah has so much pity on someone who sinned, that she should at least admit that she sinned and not go through the process and die the terrible death if she drank the potion. So how much more so how Hashem pities and is empathetic for people who do listen to his mitzvahs. So the Gemara says maybe the reason we want her to admit is because we don't want to erase the God's name on the parchment. So we said there's an opinion that first she drinks, so the parchment was erased already, and then her offering is brought, even though she's not checked until her offering is brought, but she drank already. So this is according to the opinion that she drank already, so we can't now get her to admit, so we won't be erasing God's name from the parchment because we already did that. The reason we do it now is because we have pity on her. Now we said, we're talking about an old way. They say all meal offerings came with a holy vessel at the beginning and at the end. But the Gemara asks a question, it's not necessarily so. We find that it says when you bring your meal offering, any meal offering, you bought it in your bowls made of gold or silver, And then when you came to the Beis Hamikdash, you took your meal offering that was in your bowl and you put it into a bowl of the Beis Hamikdash that was holy, of the temple that was holy. And then you put everything else in there, meaning the oil and the frankincense in general cases. And then the Kohen brings it to the altar, and he brings it at the corner of the altar, the southwestern corner, near the horn of the altar. And then he moves the frankincense to the side, and he takes a fistful, like 3 fingers, a fistful from where it will mix well with the oil, and he puts it into a second holy bowl that belonged to the temple. And then he takes from the frankincense, puts it on top, and brings it on the altar. And then he puts salt and he puts it on top of the fire. Once they brought this fistful on the altar, then the kohanim are allowed to eat, and they can mix it with whatever they want, as long as they make sure it doesn't become chametz, leaven. There was no leaven in the Beis Hamikdash. But we see that everyone brought their meal offerings with bowls of their own bowls. Here was nice bowls of silver and gold. So we say, yes, everybody brought it, but everyone was able to bring it in beautiful bowls like they used in the Beis Hamikdash. But she had to bring it in a wicker basket that was very lowly, and it stood out to show that her thing is not worthy of being in a bowl until it has to be in a bowl. And we say that even according to Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, that says that you can bring in a wooden bowl, but still has to be something nice. Only something you can bring to ministers, to important people, is allowed to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash. But something that's lowly, that's embarrassing, you're not allowed to. Only by the story of Sotah does she have to bring in that type of a basket. Now we say that he puts it into a bowl that belongs to the Beis Hamikdash that's holy, and then he sanctifies it as if to say that he has to have a mind when he puts it in, that he wants to sanctify it. But the truth is, he doesn't have to have a mind. When you put it into a holy bowl, it automatically gets sanctified. You don't have to have a mind to sanctify it. Then he tells us that you bring it, all the meal offerings you bring in the southwestern part of the altar, which is near the horn, by the corner near the horn, and that's enough. How do we know that? Because there's a verse that says this is the law of a mincha, of a meal offering, that the children of Aaron have to bring it before Hashem at the front of the mizbeach of the altar. So what does it mean before Hashem, the front of the mizbeach? So before Hashem means in the west, because the way the structure, the Mishkan was, that the Kodesh HaKadosh, the Holy of Holies, was in the west, the western part, and the altar was in front of the structure. So therefore, you want to bring up the western side of the altar, which is facing the Holy of Holies, because that has to be in front of Hashem. But then on the other hand, it says in the front of the altar. What's the front of the altar? Where the ramp goes up, and that is in the southern side of the altar. So how do you do both? How do you do it on the southern side and on the western side? So therefore, they said you bring it in the corner of the southwestern side, and that's fine. Rabbi Eliezer says he disagrees, and he says we would think you can bring it either on the western or the southern side. But if we have a general rule, whenever you find two verses that contradict each other, if you can fulfill one while fulfilling the other, that's what you preferably do. You don't give one preference over the other, but if there's a way that you can fulfill both, then you do it that way. So what do we do here? So therefore he says, when it says Lifnei Hashem, you have to bring before Hashem, it's Ma'ariv, it's in the western side. Because that's where the Heichel was, that's where the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But if you bring it there on the western side, then you are nullifying what we necessitate, that it should be at the front of the altar, in the face of the altar, which is on the southern side. But if you bring it on the southern side, you're still fulfilling the western side. How is that? So he says you bring it at the southern side, right near the corner, and he's of the opinion that the altar was, because there's three opinions. If the altar was in the center of the courtyard, right in front of the structure, if the altar was in the southern side, or if the altar was in the northern side. So he's of the opinion that the whole altar was on the northern side. So if the altar was on the northern side, the ramp was there, and going up at the beginning of the altar was facing the Holy of Holies. So you could do it on the southern side near the corner, and it's still in facing west to a certain extent. So that's why he's of the opinion that that's where you put it, on the southern side, but near the corner. Um, then we learn another thing. When they brought the meal offering on the Mizbeach, they didn't take it out. They didn't take the meal offering out of the vessel, the holy vessel. They brought it with the vessel on the altar. That's the way it was brought. Then it says that they moved the frankincense to one side, because when you pick up a fist, you said like three fingers, a fist. You're not allowed to have anything, not any piece of salt and not any piece of frankincense. Nothing could be there. So you have to move it away to make sure that nothing, even though you're not trying to get it, that nothing falls into your fistful where you're getting of the meal offerings and the oil itself. And then it says you take it from, you put it into a second vessel, holy vessel. So it says, why do you have to sanctify it twice, or bring it the first time into one vessel and then you put it into a second vessel? So he says, just like when you slaughter an animal, the knife that you use is holy. So it's a holy vessel for the temple. And even after you slaughter the animal and you already touched it with the holy vessel, you still have to take the blood and put it into another vessel of the base of Mikdash. So too a mincha meal offering, though it's not an animal, but we try to do it as similar as possible as we can to an animal. So therefore, it also has two moments of when it's sanctified. One is the first vessel, and then there is the second vessel as well. This ends off the page 14, Daf Yudalid of Sotah.